Hi, I'm here with Anthony DiMambro, and today we're going to be talking about, all about bows.
Hi, I'm Anthony DiMambro, and I make bows for violin family stringed instruments.
Are all bows made in a factory, or where is my bow from? Is there any way you could tell where my bow is made?
Yeah, so looking at your bow is definitely a German workshop instrument, or a workshop bow, rather, a workshop bow. And all that means is there is a person or a number of people that will make the frogs. It could be the same person, but they might do it in an assembly line where they'll make a bunch of sticks and then they'll make a bunch of frogs. And they're not all maybe made exactly for each other at that time. It's just somebody's making a bunch of frogs, maybe somebody else is preparing all the metal work, and somebody else is preparing all the sticks, and maybe even somebody else is finishing the sticks. So that's when we say like a workshop bow. It's built by many people doing different steps. When we say handmade, we mean it means handmade start to finish by one person. And somebody could make a batch of 5 bows, but when they get to a certain step, they know that this bow goes with this frog, and they kind of keep that going. Individual makers like me, we work in our own workshop making bows start to finish. So a factory could just be a factory. Doesn't necessarily mean like a big factory like where cars are made, but more like it could just be a small house. In France, they all worked out. A lot of them worked like in the first floor of their house, and they lived upstairs, right? So.
That's cool.
Mm-hmm.
How do you make a bow?
How do I make a bow? Slowly. It takes a while. Well, I start off with all the raw materials. It actually starts from just sheets of silver, which are then bent and formed and soldered together. It starts off as just a block of ebony and just as a blank of Pernambuco.
What is Pernambuco?
So Pernambuco is the type of wood that bows are made out of. It comes from a region in Brazil. It's a tropical hardwood. It starts off with a blank of Pernambuco. I've cut this down from just a board, and I can get that from different people, even some from Brazil. And it gets cut down, and this is all it starts off with. Is just like a square stick. You can hold it, you can look at it. It's a square stick, same thing with the frogs. I have a chunk of ebony that I cut down into blocks like this. And then from there, I will solder sheets of silver, and this is to make the ferrule, and this is a frog that's kind of already roughed out. I'm still in the early stages. I have the liner bent, it needs to be attached. From this stage, we'll rough it down into an octagon, add a tip plate, and put some curve into the stick, and you can see this is a bow that's kind of roughed out. So as soon as I get the liners fit, I will fit this to the stick and put hair in it, and then start working on finishing it, because essentially once you have hair in it, it's a bow. If you've got hair in it, it's a bow. So then I will go and finish all the fine details until you get something that looks like this. And then I'll put the winding on. This is just silver and a leather. You can hold this. This is a bow I made.
It's nice.
Thank you.
Of all the hairs in the world, why do you use horsehair? Sure.
Horsehair is used because of its strength and the ability to get it in such a long length. We use hair that comes from horses that are in cold climates. The hair that I use is from Mongolia, but you can also get hair from like northern Canada.
Can you use human hair to make a bow?
Sure, you could put human hair in a bow. It wouldn't work very well. It'd be tough to get hair long enough. You need hair that's over 30 inches long about 30 inches long, and unfortunately human hair is pretty weak, and so it would break very easily and too fine.
Playing. Oh, my hair broke.
I'm sure somebody's tried it. I wonder if you could find a video of somebody who's put human hair into a bow.
How long does it take for you to make a bow? Because my estimate is 3 days, and I bet that's wrong.
I wish it could take me 3 days. I think it takes most people about 30 hours to make, a finely handmade bow start to finish.
What kind of tools do you have to make a bow?
Yeah, good question. So to make bows, we can't just go to a store and buy the tools we need. A lot of the tools are pretty unique. We have to make a lot of our own tools. So there are a couple machines over here. This is a lathe, and the lathe we use to make a lot of tools. We do very little bow work on it, maybe some serious repairs, but otherwise we use the lathe to make a lot of tools and to make the button. On the lathe, I'll make something like this. This is to cut out the end of the stick so the button can sit on it. This is to cut out the front hole for the screw. And the ability to do this on the lathe is nice because let's say I get a very valuable bow that needs a restoration. I want to make things to the exact size that was there before. So if I need to make a cutter to a specific size, I can't go to the store and buy these bits at 3.12 millimeters. I can make it myself. And so something like this is used to do the eyes on the frog, the pearl eye. So something like this is designed to go in there and do the pearl eye. But most other tools that we use are hand tools. Some of them you can buy pretty easily. These are just regular block planes. So it's got a sharp blade in there, and it shaves off. You can see there's thin shavings of wood. Pernambuco,
Paper.
yeah, it comes out as thin as paper. Pernambuco is a very difficult wood to plane, so when we get close to finish, this is a scraper plane, which means the angle on the blade is so high that it works like scraping it. So this is a scraper plane. This is a traditional bow plane, I guess. These were planes very similar to what Peccatte would have used. Like I mentioned, Peccatte earlier, Dominique Peccatte, very similar. Has a very high angle on the blade. We also use gouges, which is very similar to a chisel, but it's got a curve to it. Yeah, I use that on the frog to give it the curve. And then all sorts of different files and knives. These are just everything else. Everything is done by hand. You could probably fit all the tools you need in just like a tackle box, like a fishing tackle box, to make bows. Bow makers as well as instrument makers, we get our materials from a variety of sources. Sometimes we get them from other makers, who are retiring. Sometimes we get materials from distributors, kind of like wholesalers, people who sell this kind of materials, just like other businesses that sell materials. Pernambuco is getting really hard to get in the United States, so a lot of the wood is either has been circulating for a while. So meaning getting it from other makers that have amassed a large amount of it and who are no longer making.
Oh, okay.
So there's a large movement to replanting Pernambuco, but unfortunately it's not the bow makers who are using all the Pernambuco. Pernambuco has been used for a lot of things. Pernambuco has been used as a dye wood because it colors when you get it wet. It makes things purple. So they'll use Pernambuco as a dye wood. They'll also make beautiful furniture out of it. And so Pernambuco has been used for lots of other things other than bows. I think if bow makers were the only people that use Pernambuco, I don't think we'd have a problem with it.
Yeah.
But other woods are used. There is Brazil wood is used for less expensive bows. A lot of workshop bows are made out of Brazil wood. Also, Ipe is a type of wood. Ipe. This is
It reminds me of like a internet thingy that you, I don't know, something with a credit card or something. I don't know.
Ipe, something with the credit card. Yeah, so Ipe is another wood that some bow makers are starting to use because of how hard Pernambuco is to get. Some bow makers are experimenting with alternative woods, so Ipe, acacia. Some bows were made out of snakewood. Here is a blank of snakewood, and there's a figure to it, which is why they call it snakewood. But nowadays we use snakewood for Baroque bows, so that's kind of the predecessor, the bows before the modern bow. This is a Baroque bow that I had made, and here, polished up, you can see kind of the figure. That's why it's called snakewood. I think it's nice as a bow maker to have a variety of materials to work with, because then as you get to know your materials, you can make bows specifically with specific characteristics. So if a player says, I want a bow that plays like this, I can go into my pile of wood and say, this piece of wood will play like that. Hopefully, when I'm done. That's the hope,
Yeah.
Yeah.
How did you get interested in bow making? What got you started?
Sure. So what got me interested into bow making was I had been working on bows for quite a while, about almost 10 years. It was like 8 years or so. Just kind of doing restoration work and just typical maintenance like rehairs. And I felt like there was a lot of bow makers already who were making fine bows, but just not enough people that specialized in fixing them and restoring them. And so I kind of was focused on that for quite some time. And it was after I worked on this beautiful bow. It was a bow made by Emile Ouchard. He's a famous French maker. He lived from like 1900 to 1969, I think. And after working on one of his bows, I was just like, wow, this is what I want to make. This is what I want to do. So I was inspired by a bow that he had made. And I'm still a big fan of his work. And I've made a couple bows that are copies of his.
Why does my teacher tell me not to play swords with my bow? Isn't it that the obvious thing to do with it?
Yeah, it is. It's also a lot of fun. But unfortunately, just like anything, I think it's important to have good habits. We want to take care of our violin and our bow. Even though right now it may not seem like a lot of money, bows can be quite expensive. Some of the finest bows I mentioned earlier, François Tourte, his bows are almost $1 million. Almost, not quite, but they're going to be there soon enough. $1 million for a bow. So your bow is made of fiberglass, and those can be inexpensive bows, but still, a fiberglass bow could be like $30, $45. That's still a lot of money, and they can still break. So that's why we don't play swords, because we want to develop good habits now. So when you get to a full-size violin and bow, and you've got a nice bow, we know how to take care of it and how to have respect for it. There's lots of other things we can play swords with.
Like swords.
Like swords. Lightsabers.
What other famous bow makers are there? Are there any others?
Oh yes, I mean, as far as the old French bow makers, François Tourte is credited with kind of the invention of the bow that we use. There are definitely bows before that, but the typical bow model that we use is based off his design. And so his bows can be quite valuable. And going on from there, a different kind of school of making, Dominique Peccatte is another maker. And there are a few Peccattes. There's a family. So Charles Peccatte also makes bows. And from there, there's Eugene Sartory, Joseph Alfred Lamy, and Emile Ouchard. So these are all French makers. There are excellent German makers as well. A lot of them worked for French workshops, such as the Nürnbergers. It's a huge family, and same thing with the Pfretzschners. I think today there are a lot of great modern makers, more than I could list right now. And I wouldn't want to leave anybody out because there's just so many great makers. I did learn bow making from my previous employer, Peter Psarianos. He was a student of Bill Salchow, who was probably taught more American bow makers than anybody else. But also I've been taking workshops with Rodney Mohr, who has just reached his 1,000th bow and has won so many awards in bow making. And I've really learned a lot from him. He's been a great teacher, but there are so many modern bow makers right now that are producing really high quality bows.
What is rosin, and why does the bow really need rosin?
Sure. So rosin is a secret recipe. Really, a lot of rosin manufacturers, the recipes that they have are secret. So I don't know what's in all the rosins, but I can tell you basically rosin comes from from pine resin, which is just a product that trees kind of produce. It's similar to sap, but not quite. And then that is cooked down and mixed with other ingredients. So sometimes there are some rosins that actually use beeswax, some rosins that use some sort of I would like some sort of maybe oil along with it. Not a lot, very, very little bit, but gums would be mixed with like a kind of, not like the gum you chew, but there's types of resins and gums that are mixed together. Rosin is what gives the hair grip. I wish I had some hair without rosin on it so you could try it and you'd see it would make very little to no noise. But rosin is what gives the hair grip. It's rosin that actually makes the sound. So the type of hair allows the rosin to stick to it.
How often should I rosin my bow?
I think of rosining our bow just when we need it. I think less is more. So what that means is when you start to feel it not grab, then you could add a little more rosin. If you find that you're adding a lot of rosin to get a sound, it means your hair's worn out and it's time to get a rehair. But I think as far as you may not need to rosin every day. Some players rosin every 3 days or every 3 times they practice. It really depends on how much you play. And so I think it's best not to say every time or once a week. I think it just depends on how the bow is working. And over time you'll start to know, oh, I think I need more rosin. And so that's something just to pay attention to as you play. Try that for like a week. Don't put rosin on your bow and just see when it starts to stop losing grip. And then you can find out for yourself how often you need to rosin your bow.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you make a bow that can be used for more than one thing? Like be playing on your violin, or be used by pencil or a toothpick?
I mean, bows have they could already have more than one use, right? So you can play your instrument with it. I think you could also clean your ear with it, or maybe pick your nose with it. But I don't think we could, I think bows are also meant to be works of art. So giving them more than one function kind of takes away from what the bow is. But, people do use bows for more than one thing. They'll conduct with it, they'll play with their cat with it, but I think really bows are meant to be just for use on the instrument.
How do I take care of my bow? Is there more ways than, putting on rosin?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So you tighten your bow when you play. So when you're done playing, it's important to loosen the hair because the hair does stretch out. Also, on wood bows, it's not good to keep it under all that tension all the time. The other thing you could do is wipe it down with a cloth that you only use on your bow. you could take a cleaning cloth and just wipe it down the stick a couple times, because the rosin will build up. This is your bow, right?
Yeah, this is mine.
Do you see the rosin built up on the stick?
Yeah.
And over time, so rosin, same like I was talking about the pine resins that are used to make rosin, they also use resins in varnish on your instrument. And so what happens is the rosin will kind of solidify and like a varnish, and it becomes very hard to take off at that time. So just keeping it clean helps me when I have to rehair it, because I like to clean everybody's bows. But yeah, just wiping it down is another thing. Also, just making sure when you take it in for regular intervals for rehair, because a bow maker or a person who rehairs the bow doesn't necessarily have to be a bow maker. We'll go over and check everything to make sure that everything is properly lubricated. So the best thing you could do, other than wiping it down and loosening it, would be just to keep your eye on it, know how the bow's working. Is it tightening for you? Is it loosening easily for you? And how it sounds. Is it working? Is it gripping? Is it not gripping? If it's not gripping, hair could be dirty or it's worn out. It's time for rehair.
Yeah. How do I know if my bow is too tight or too loose?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think it's different for every player. Some players have a very strong arm, they play with a lot of weight, and some players get more sound from just the pull. So I think different playing styles require different tensions. Also, different bows require different tensions. So if we take a look at your bow,
right now it's loosened.
Yeah, right now it's loosened. So what I like to tell players is just tight enough so you don't hit the stick when you're playing. Okay, my hands are clean, so I'm touching the hair. Don't touch the hair. Okay, so that means if you're playing something that's very aggressive and very loud, and you find that you're hitting the stick as you play, that means it's too loose. It means you need to tighten it maybe a half a turn or a quarter turn more. And so that way when you're playing, you don't hit the stick. Now if you're playing something lush and romantic, you know, that really needs a nice full tone, a little bit looser is okay, because it'll give you a slightly better tone. So some teachers, they start off saying, oh, you know, so you can fit a pencil through, and I think that's a good general rule, but my idea is just loose enough so you don't hit the stick when you're playing. So it's too tight if there's no curve left in the stick. If you tighten it and the stick is straight, now you have no curve to work off of, and it actually makes the stick feel weaker at some points. And the other thing is it's not good for the bow. Too loose, that's because you're hitting the stick. So if you're hitting the stick, it's too loose. So just tight enough so you don't hit the stick, and that might change depending on what pieces you're playing. If you're playing just kind of, like I said, light and romantic pieces, that's fine. But if something very aggressive or percussive, then a little bit tighter to protect the bow is better.
So when I put my violin away and I put my bow, I mean, I always loosen it, but how loose should it be?
Just enough so that the hair touches the stick.
Like that?
Yeah. You don't need to loosen it more than that so it's drooping down.
Yeah.
But just enough so the hair is touching the stick. And maybe even just like a little bit, even less than that.
Okay.
That's how loose.
Can you make a bow that's unbreakable?
I think we can make bows that are very durable. I think everything at some point is breakable. They do make bows out of carbon fiber, which is very strong. They're very durable, but you know, I think even carbon fiber has a breaking point.
So you still have to be careful with your bow. Sorry.
And it's good to develop those good habits now.
Yeah. How do I know when I should get a new bow?
Sure, like, well, bows can last a very long time. So you guys are still growing. So when you move to the next size instrument, you want the next size bow. As far as, let's say, you're in a full size instrument, you get a new bow when you feel like the bow isn't doing everything you need. Or if you want something different out of your instrument. The best way to know if you need a new bow is to just, if you suspect that you need a new bow, and 2, to go and try some new bows and see what other bows have to offer. A good time to get a new bow is when you're getting a new instrument, after you get a new instrument, because you might want to find a bow that matches that instrument. Or if you break your bow, you're going to need a new bow.
So how often should I get my bow rehaired, or in general, how often should us all get our bow rehaired?
Sure. It does depend on how much you play. But a good timeline could be anywhere from 4 months to a year, depending on how much you play. That's a big range, I know. Hair does wear out, hair does kind of deteriorate over time. So even if you put your bow away in a case for 2 years and you come back to playing, you'd want to get it rehaired. Okay. If you play about an hour a day, on average, you could go like that 6 months. In Michigan, where we live, I recommend at least twice a year, so we can adjust for the humidity and the temperature. In the winter, we do the hair a little bit longer, and in the summer, we do it a little bit tighter, because with the high humidity in the summer, the hair will stretch out. So sometimes the hair that we did in the winter doesn't last because there isn't enough length. So twice a year is good in Michigan, but there are players that I rehair almost 4 times a year because of how much they play.
Thank you, Anthony DiMambro, for sharing with us everything you know about the bow. We've learned so much. Please like, subscribe, and share. That's all for today. See you next time. Bye for now.